There's a short list of foods researchers keep circling back to. Most folks have never tried a single one, not because they're rare, not because they're dear. This country just stopped eating them. One of these 15 has nearly vanished from the American plate in 2 generations. Not a small shift. Another carries a mineral so concentrated, one bite covers your whole week's need. Low levels, tie to thyroid trouble. Before we go further, nothing here replaces your doctor. 20 years a nurse, and I'm not your prescriber. What I'm sharing is what the research says, and what the bedside taught me to notice. Wait until number 2. Small, silver. Fishing families have eaten it for generations. Labs are only now catching up. Number 4 might be growing in your garden right now. Most folks spend their whole lives pulling it out. Number 11 has sat in Japanese kitchens for 1,000 years. Western researchers only caught on recently. 15 foods. Real evidence behind every one of them. Nothing here is folklore, and nothing here is a passing fad. Powerful stuff. And every single one you can start eating this very week. Let's start with the one most people pull out of their garden without a second thought. First up is stinging nettle. And yes, it stings. That part's not folklore. I got my first real welt from it as a girl, out picking something else entirely in my grandmother's patch. Or maybe it was an aunt's patch. That detail's gotten fuzzy over the years. But the sting itself, I remember just fine. Once you cook it, the sting disappears completely, and what's left behind is a green, carrying real amounts of iron and calcium, more than a lot of the vegetables that get all the attention on a dinner plate. Research on wild greens keeps circling back to nettle as one of the more overlooked sources of both. It grows along fence lines and the edges of woods practically on its own. No coaxing required, which always struck me as a small, quiet kind of provision. The kind that shows up whether you asked for it or not. Always wear gloves when you harvest it, and always cook it before you eat it, whether that's a quick blanch or working it into a soup. If you're on blood pressure or water pill medication, mention nettle to your doctor before making it a regular habit, since it can nudge those numbers too. Nettle's been used across European folk traditions for centuries, well before anybody had a laboratory to explain what was happening inside the leaf, mostly for joint discomfort and general vitality, though I'll steer clear of promising anything specific myself. Young nettle tops, picked before the plant flowers, are the most tender and the least fibrous, and they cook down into something remarkably close to spinach once you've gotten past the gloves and tongs part of the process. Once it's been dried properly, nettle makes for a pleasant, mild-tasting tea, and drying takes the sting out entirely, the same way cooking it does. I keep a jar of the dried leaf sitting right on the shelf alongside my regular tea, and over time, it's become a quiet, ordinary part of the week, rather than anything I make a fuss over or treat as special. Number 2 is the one I promised you earlier, the small silver fish that fishing families have been eating whole, bones and all, for generations. Sardines. Eating the bones along with the flesh is exactly the point. They're soft enough to eat whole once canned, and they carry a real dose of calcium most people assume only comes from a glass of milk. Add in a real, solid amount of omega-3 fat, and you've got one of the most complete small packages of nutrition sitting on a grocery shelf, usually in a can that costs less than a cup of coffee. There's a kind of humility in a fish that small doing that much work nutritionally, when we spend so much money chasing after fancier things that do less. Look for the ones packed in olive oil or water, not a heavy sauce, and eat them straight from the can on crackers or mashed into a bit of mustard for a quick sandwich. Sardines feed low on the ocean food chain, mostly on zooplankton and tiny crustaceans, which means they carry a fraction of the mercury you'd find in larger, longer-living fish like tuna or swordfish, making them one of the safer fish choices to eat regularly, even for pregnant women, according to current guidance. A single can eaten a couple of times a week is a reasonable habit for most adults, and it's one of the few foods on today's list that requires absolutely no preparation beyond opening the lid. Fresh sardines, on the rare occasion you can actually find them, are well worth trying grilled whole with nothing more than a bit of salt, lemon, and good olive oil. But the canned version is honestly where most of us will build a lasting, sustainable habit, since it keeps for years sitting in the pantry without any fuss, ready whenever you finally decide to reach for it. Number 3 is sauerkraut, the real kind, raw and unpasteurized. not the shelf-stable jar sitting next to the ketchup that's been heated until nothing living is left in it. I started making my own years back. I want to say it was the same year I put in the second garden bed, though honestly, the years have started running together on me a little. A well-known clinical study out of Stanford put this to a real test. Researchers had healthy adults eat a diet either heavy in fermented foods or heavy in fiber for 10 weeks. The fermented food group saw a genuine increase in the variety of their gut microbes, and their blood tests showed lower levels of a whole set of inflammatory markers by the end. The high fiber group, surprisingly, didn't show the same shift. One practical note: fermented foods can be high in histamine, which bothers some people more than others, and they do carry sodium, so if you're watching your salt intake, a modest serving is the way to go rather than a whole bowl at once. Make sure whatever you buy or make says raw or unpasteurized right on the label. The pasteurized version on most store shelves has been heated enough to kill off the very cultures that made the Stanford study's results possible in the first place. Fermentation is one of the oldest food preservation methods there is, older than refrigeration by thousands of years, and cultures all over the world developed their own version of it independently, from kimchi in Korea to kvass in Eastern Europe, all landing on roughly the same idea. Making your own is dead simple, just cabbage, salt, and thyme. No special equipment required beyond a clean jar and a bit of patience while it works on the counter. If you're brand new to fermented foods generally, start slow. Just a spoonful or two a day to begin with, and build up gradually from there over the following weeks. Introducing too much too quickly can leave you dealing with some genuine bloating, while your gut works to adjust to all the new company that's suddenly moved in. This one's Purslane, and if you keep any kind of garden, chances are you've pulled it, cursed it under your breath, and thrown it straight onto the compost pile more times than you'd care to admit. It creeps up through the cracks in the sidewalk. It creeps up along the gravel by the shed. Give it a sliver of open dirt and a little sun, and it'll find a way in, which is exactly why most folks treat it like trash instead of supper. Here's what stopped me cold the first time I read into it. Food researchers who study wild greens have measured a remarkable amount of plant-based omega-3 fat in purslane leaves, more than any other leafy green that's been tested. Not the same as what's in a fillet of salmon. That's a different animal entirely. But for a leaf, it's a remarkable thing to find. One caveat worth knowing: purslane is high in oxalates, so if you're prone to kidney stones, it's worth mentioning to your doctor before eating it regularly. I've got a patch of it volunteering by the tomato bed every single year, and every single year I tell myself I'll finally pull the whole thing. I never do. My grandmother, or maybe it was her sister, I honestly couldn't tell you which one of them anymore, used to toss a handful of it into whatever soup was already on the stove. Waste not. You can eat the leaves raw. They've got a bit of a lemony crunch to them. Straight in a salad. Or wilt a handful into soup the same way you would spinach. Right at the very end. The research on this plant's mineral content keeps landing on the same conclusion. It's one of the most overlooked greens most people will ever step on without a second glance. What gets me is that purslane isn't some obscure specialty item. It's eaten on purpose in parts of Greece, Turkey, and Mexico, tossed into salads and stews without a second thought. While here in this country, extension offices publish guides on how to kill it. Same plant, completely different reputation, depending entirely on which side of an ocean you happen to be standing on. Beyond the fat content, it's carrying a real spread of vitamin C, vitamin A, and magnesium, along with more potassium per leaf than you'd expect from something this small. None of that gets measured by the folks spraying it out of their flower beds year after year, but it's there whether anybody's counting or not. There's a decent chance you've heard someone insist a weed is a weed. Plain and simple. Nothing more. Not worth a second look. I gently push back on that. A weed, most of the time, is really just a plant nobody's gotten around to deciding is worth planting on purpose yet. Purslane happens to be living, breathing proof of exactly that kind of overlooked value, sitting right there in plain sight, waiting on somebody to finally notice it. Next up is nutritional yeast, and I know how that sounds, believe me. It sounds like something out of a health food catalog, not something you'd actually want to eat. But this is a deactivated yeast, grown specifically for food, not the same stuff that makes your bread rise. Folks sprinkle it over popcorn. I put it on my scrambled eggs most mornings, and it's got a savory, almost cheesy taste to it that surprises people every time. Here's the part that matters. A lot of B vitamins get lost or run low as we get older, and one of them, B12, is especially hard for the body to hold on to once you're past 60. Fortified nutritional yeast carries a real, measurable dose of it in just a spoonful or two, along with a full spread of B vitamins working alongside it. It's not something that grows in a garden bed, I'll grant you that, but I think of it a bit like the creator's backup plan, a way to get what your body needs even on the days your plate doesn't have much color on it. Look for the kind that's fortified specifically with B12. Not every brand carries it. Stir a spoonful into mashed potatoes, popcorn, scrambled eggs, or a pot of soup right at the end. It's a small habit that quietly covers a gap most people don't even know they have. This isn't the same yeast that's in a packet for baking bread, and it won't make anything rise. It's grown specifically to be eaten, then deactivated with heat so it stops being a living culture, which is exactly why it's shelf-stable and safe to eat straight out of the jar. It's become something of a staple in plant-based kitchens for exactly this reason, since B12 is one nutrient that's genuinely difficult to get enough of without any animal products at all. But you don't need to follow any particular diet to benefit from adding a spoonful here and there. A common mix-up is worth clearing up here. Nutritional yeast and brewer's yeast come from a related family, but they're grown and processed in different ways. And brewer's yeast tends to carry a much more bitter taste, one most folks don't care for sprinkled over their supper. If a jar you've picked up tastes sharp or unpleasantly bitter, there's a decent chance you've grabbed the wrong one off the shelf by mistake. Number 6 is the beet, root and greens both, and I mean the whole plant, not just the part most folks slice up for a salad and call it a day. The greens on top get thrown in the compost more often than they get eaten, and that's a real shame, because they're carrying just as much to offer as the root underneath. Simple. Beets carry a natural compound your body converts into something that helps your blood vessels open up and relax, the same way you'd crank open a window on a stuffy day to let the air move through. Researchers who pooled together the results of dozens of clinical trials found that regular beet intake was tied to a real, measurable drop in blood pressure, both the top number and the bottom one. This isn't just a vegetable that turns your soup a deep shade of red. It's one of the few plain foods with real, repeated evidence behind it for helping blood move where it needs to go. Roast it, juice it, or steam the greens the way you would kale. If you're already on blood pressure medication, mention it to your doctor before making beets a daily habit. Evidence indicates the effect can add up alongside what your prescription is already doing, and that's worth having on your chart. Beyond the blood flow story, beets carry folate, manganese, and a good amount of fiber. And the greens on top are honestly one of the most underrated parts of the whole vegetable aisle, richer in vitamin K and iron than the root most people actually cook. Beets have been cultivated for thousands of years, first mostly for the greens, with the root only becoming the popular part much later in history. Somewhere along the way, we started throwing out the half that got us interested in the plant in the first place. One more thing worth knowing, so it doesn't catch you off guard. Beets can turn your urine a shade of pink or red the next day, and it's completely harmless, just a natural pigment called betalain passing straight through your system. It surprises people every single time it happens, and more than one person has called their doctor in a genuine panic over it, only to find out it was nothing more than lunch. Number 7 is amaranth, and here's the part that'll make you look at your garden different. In a lot of backyards across this country, amaranth grows wild and gets pulled right alongside the crabgrass. Folks call it pigweed and yank it without a second thought, not knowing that the very same plant, or a close cousin of it, was a staple crop that fed entire civilizations for centuries. What makes amaranth stand out among grains is its protein. It carries a fuller set of amino acids than wheat or rice, including one called lysine that most grains fall short on. Think of amino acids as the individual bricks your body uses to build and repair itself. Most grains hand you an incomplete pile of bricks. Amaranth hands you a fuller set. I let a patch of it go to seed at the back of my garden most years, more out of curiosity than anything else, and by late in the season it stands taller than I do, heavy with more seed than I'll ever get around to harvesting properly. Cook the seed like you would quinoa, or toast it dry in a hot pan until it pops. It turns into something almost like a tiny, crunchy popcorn. The greens are edible too. cooked down the same way you'd treat spinach. Amaranth was a staple crop for the Aztec people, grown alongside corn and beans, and by some accounts it was cultivated on a scale that rivaled corn itself before much of that agricultural tradition was deliberately disrupted following colonization. It's also naturally free of gluten, which makes it a useful grain alternative for folks managing a sensitivity. And the leaves, when harvested young and tender, taste remarkably close to spinach when you wilt them down in a hot pan with a little garlic. Amaranth flour behaves quite a bit differently than wheat flour once you start baking with it. It doesn't hold together the same way on its own, missing the gluten that gives wheat dough its stretch. Most bakers blend it with another flour, rather than using it entirely alone. That's a small technical detail, but it'll save you a good deal of frustration the very first time you try working with it in your own kitchen. Number 8 is dandelion greens. And I know exactly what you're thinking, because I thought the same thing for years. It's a weed. It's what you spray, what you dig out at the root, what you curse at when it comes back in the same spot you cleared the season before. I've pulled more dandelions off this property than I could ever count. Here's what changed my mind. A single cup of raw dandelion greens covers your entire day's need for vitamin K, and it comes with more calcium than the same amount of broccoli and more iron than spinach by weight. We've been pulling one of the most nutritionally dense greens in the yard straight into a trash bag, season after season. I think about the generations of people before us who ate these without a second thought. Not because they were making a health decision, just because the plant was there, and food was not something you wasted. There's a kind of quiet wisdom in that I find myself coming back to more and more. Young leaves, picked before the plant flowers, are the most tender and the least bitter. Toss them into a salad the way you'd use arugula. Wilt them in a pan with a little olive oil and garlic, or steep the dried leaf into a tea. The bitterness softens with heat, and it softens more if you give the fresh leaves a quick soak in cold water before you eat them raw. Dandelion greens also carry inulin, a prebiotic fiber that feeds the beneficial bacteria living in your gut without being digested itself. The same kind of fiber researchers have been studying for its role in supporting a healthy gut environment. It's not a glamorous story. It's just a weed doing quiet, useful work, the same as it always has. A couple of things worth knowing before you go out and harvest your own. Only pick from areas you're absolutely certain have never been sprayed with herbicide or pesticide, and stay well away from roadsides. And if you're on a blood thinner like warfarin, the high vitamin K content here is the same consideration I mentioned with Natto, worth a conversation with your doctor before you start eating dandelion greens regularly. Beyond all of that, dandelion comes up earlier in the year than almost anything else in the garden and stays later into the cold months, which means it's available fresh for a longer stretch than most things you'd actually plant on purpose. The creator, it seems, didn't put weeds where he put them by accident. Number 9 is the Brazil nut, and this is the one I mentioned right at the start. The one carrying a mineral so concentrated that a single nut can cover your entire day's need. That mineral is selenium, and it's not something most American diets get nearly enough of, since it depends heavily on what's actually in the soil where your food was grown. Selenium helps your body build the antioxidant defenses that sweep out internal rust before it piles up and does damage, and it plays a real role in how your thyroid gland manages its hormones. Researchers studying populations with low selenium levels have found real, measurable ties to higher rates of thyroid trouble. Here's the part folks get wrong constantly. More is not better with this one. Just 1 to 2 nuts a day covers what you need, and eating a whole handful daily, day after day, can push you into selenium levels that cause their own problems, hair loss, and brittle nails among them. If you've got a thyroid condition, talk to your doctor before making this a daily habit. I keep a little jar of them by the coffee maker, 1 nut with my coffee most mornings. And that's all it takes. Selenium levels in the soil vary enormously depending on where in the world a Brazil nut tree happens to be growing, which means the exact amount in any single nut is unpredictable. That's part of why the guidance leans toward 1 or 2 nuts rather than treating any single nut as an exact measured dose. These trees grow wild in the Amazon and can't be farmed in orchards the way most nuts are. They depend on a very specific chain, orchid bees, which are the only bees strong enough to pry open the flower, and those bees depend on a particular wild orchid to reproduce. Without the orchid, no bees. Without the bees, no Brazil nuts. And the seeds can only be dispersed by agoutis, the large rodents that chew through the cannonball-hard pods. That whole chain has to stay intact. Every time I think about it, I find it quietly extraordinary. Store them in the refrigerator once you've opened the bag. They carry a high fat content and go rancid faster than most other nuts left sitting out on a counter. A rancid nut tastes distinctly bitter and off, and you will absolutely know it the moment you bite down on one by mistake. So don't be shy about tossing a batch that's turned. Number 10 is miso, the fermented soybean paste that's been at the center of the Japanese table for well over 1,000 years. Not the instant packets in the soup aisle, the real kind, unpasteurized, sold refrigerated, with living cultures still intact inside it. Miso is made from soybeans, salt, and a fermentation culture called koji. And depending on how long it's been left to ferment, you get something ranging from a pale, mild white paste all the way through to a dark, deeply savory red that's been aging in cedar barrels for 2 or 3 years. The longer it ferments, the richer and more complex it gets. Here's the practical thing most people get wrong. If you stir miso into a boiling pot of soup, you've just killed every beneficial culture in it, which defeats the whole purpose of choosing the unpasteurized kind. The traditional Japanese method is to turn off the heat first, let the broth cool a little, and then dissolve the miso in at the end. It'll still be warm enough to eat. It just won't be hot enough to undo what the fermentation spent weeks building. As a fermented food, it fits right into the same story as the sauerkraut we talked about earlier. Research on fermented foods and gut health has been building steadily, and miso, with its live cultures and prebiotic fiber, shows up in that body of evidence as one of the traditional fermented foods worth paying attention to. It's high in sodium, and I won't pretend otherwise. A tablespoon or so per day, worked into a soup or a dressing, or stirred into warm water as a simple broth, is the reasonable range most traditional Japanese patterns stay within. If you're watching your salt intake, that context matters. Look for the word unpasteurized right on the label and buy it from the refrigerated section, not a shelf-stable jar. Once you've opened it, it keeps well in the back of the refrigerator for months, and a single container goes a long way since you're using a spoonful at a time, not a cupful. There's something I've always found quietly moving about a food this old and this ordinary. A paste that Buddhist monks carried from China to Japan in the 6th century, that fed samurai, that fed farmers through hard winters, that is still sitting in refrigerators across Japan today, made by the same method it was 1,000 years ago. Some things don't need improving. Number 11 is natto, fermented soybeans that have been part of the Japanese table for over 1,000 years. Sticky, stringy, and I'll be honest with you, an acquired taste for most Western palates. But stick with me on this one, because the story behind it is genuinely remarkable. Natto carries 2 things worth knowing about. One is vitamin K2, a form of vitamin K most Americans barely get any of, and researchers have linked it to how your body directs calcium, keeping it in your bones where it belongs instead of your arteries where it doesn't. The other is a natural compound discovered by a researcher back in the 1980s who found that natto could break down a blood clot sitting right in a lab dish. Researchers have been studying that clot-clearing compound in human trials ever since. If you are on a blood thinner, warfarin especially, do not add natto to your routine without talking to your doctor first. The vitamin K2 in it can work directly against how that medication is dosed, and that's not a small thing to get wrong. This is one where the conversation with your doctor has to come first. For most everyone else, a small serving, a few times a week, spooned over rice with a bit of mustard the way it's traditionally served, is how it's been eaten safely for generations before anybody put it in a research paper. The researcher who first identified that clot-clearing compound tested it against over 100 other fermented foods before landing on natto as having, by far, the strongest effect in his lab comparisons, which is a fairly remarkable place for a humble bowl of fermented soybeans to land. Natto's stickiness comes from the fermentation itself, long strands that pull apart when you stir it with chopsticks, and that texture is exactly what tells you it's been made correctly, not a sign anything's gone wrong. If the smell puts you off the first time you open the container, you're in good company. Plenty of folks in Japan themselves grew up feeling exactly the same way about it as children, before eventually coming around to it later in life. Strong smell, surprisingly mild flavor once you actually taste it. It's a food that asks you to trust the process a little before passing judgment. Number 12 is beef liver, and this is the one I mentioned back at the start too, the one that's nearly vanished off the average plate. Your grandparents, or more likely your great-grandparents, probably ate this regularly without thinking twice about it. Somewhere around the middle of the last century, that habit largely disappeared from the American table. Ounce for ounce, liver carries more usable vitamin A, B12, iron, and copper than almost any muscle cut you'll find at the butcher counter. Not a small gap either. Not at all. It's the most nutrient-dense food most people have never put on their plate, pushed aside not because the science turned against it, not because the science ever turned against it. One real caution here, and I mean this seriously. Liver is so rich in vitamin A that eating it daily, in large amounts, can actually push you past a safe upper limit. And that matters most of all if you're pregnant, since too much vitamin A in early pregnancy carries real, documented risk. A serving once a week, maybe twice, is the sensible range for most healthy adults. If you're pregnant or trying to be, talk to your doctor before adding liver as a regular habit. Ground beef liver in with regular ground beef, a small amount folded into a meatloaf or a batch of chili, is the easiest way I know to work it in without anybody at the table noticing. Part of why liver fell out of favor had less to do with nutrition and more to do with taste and unfamiliarity. An entire generation grew up without ever seeing it prepared at home. So it started to feel foreign rather than familiar, even though it had been a regular Sunday dinner not too many decades before. Copper, zinc, and a form of vitamin B9 called folate round out the list, all of them concentrated in liver at levels that would take a very large plate of vegetables to match, which is part of why traditional cultures around the world treated organ meat as something closer to medicine than an ordinary meal. If the texture is what's holding you back, and for a lot of people it genuinely is, freezing it first and grating it while it's still partly frozen, straight into whatever you're already cooking on the stove, is a trick plenty of home cooks lean on to get past that hurdle without changing a great deal about how the finished dish actually tastes. Number 13 is hemp seeds, sometimes sold as hemp hearts, the soft little seed once the hard outer shell's been removed. And no, before anybody asks, there's nothing in these that will affect you the way the plant's more famous cousin does. What makes hemp seeds stand out is balance. They carry a complete set of amino acids, unusual for a plant food, alongside both of the two main families of fat your body needs and can't make on its own. Most diets lean heavily toward one of those two fat families and fall short on the other. Hemp seeds hand you both in one small spoonful. I sprinkle them over practically everything: oatmeal, salad, plain yogurt, and every time I do, I think about how much good the Creator packed into something you could hold a whole week's supply of in the palm of one hand. 2 to 3 tablespoons a day is a reasonable target, and they've got a mild and nutty flavor that won't fight with whatever else is on the plate. Hemp has been cultivated for thousands of years for fiber, oil, and food all at once, and the seed itself carries essentially no measurable amount of the compound that gives its more famous cousin a reputation. They're two very different parts of a very versatile plant family. Beyond the fat and protein, hemp seeds carry a genuine amount of magnesium and iron too, minerals that tend to run low in a lot of modern diets regardless of how carefully somebody's trying to eat. Make sure you buy them already hulled, meaning the hard outer shell has already been removed, since the whole seed with that shell still intact is hard to digest and mostly just passes straight through the body undigested, which more or less defeats the purpose of eating it to begin with. Number 14 is spirulina, a blue-green algae that's been used as a food source by communities in Africa and Mexico for centuries, and more recently studied by researchers looking for concentrated nutrition in the smallest possible package, space agencies among them. It's carrying a remarkably high amount of protein for a plant-based food, along with a real dose of iron and antioxidant compounds researchers have studied for their effect on inflammation. A little goes a long way. We're talking about a teaspoon or two, not a whole plateful. Sourcing matters a great deal here. Spirulina grown in poorly managed water can pick up contaminants, so buy from a supplier who tests for purity. And if you have an autoimmune condition, mention spirulina to your doctor before adding it in. since it can stimulate immune activity in a way that isn't right for everyone. Stir it into a smoothie. It's got a strong, almost oceanic taste that fruit does a good job of covering. And remember that even something this small, grown in plain water, carries more than most of us give it credit for. Spirulina has been evaluated in feasibility studies as a candidate food for long space missions by NASA and other agencies, precisely because it packs so much nutrition into so little weight and volume. None of that changes what's in the jar you'd buy at a health food store, but it does tell you something about how concentrated this algae really is. It grows in warm, alkaline water and has been part of traditional diets in parts of Africa and Mexico for a very long time, long before any space agency took an interest in it at all. There's also chlorella, a related algae that gets confused with spirulina fairly often, but they are not actually the same organism, and their nutrient profiles differ from one another in some real ways. So it's worth not assuming one can simply stand in for the other the next time you're standing in the supplement aisle working from a shopping list. Number 15, and the last one on today's list, is bone broth. And if that sounds like something your grandmother simmered on the back of the stove for 2 days without ever writing down a recipe, you're not far off. It's simmered bones, usually with a splash of vinegar to help draw out what's inside them, cooked low and slow for many hours. That long simmer draws collagen and gelatin out of the bones and connective tissue, and preliminary research suggests those compounds may support gut lining and joint comfort, though the evidence here is still developing compared to some of the other foods on today's list, and I want to be straight with you about that. There's something fitting about ending on this one. It's the food of using every part, wasting nothing, the kind of quiet stewardship my own grandmother practiced without ever once calling it that. Simmer it yourself if you've got the time, roughly 24 hours for beef bones, or look for a low-sodium version at the store if you don't. Either way, it's a gentle, warming habit to close out today's list with. Every culture with a tradition of using the whole animal seems to have landed on some version of this, a long, slow simmer that turns bones nobody wanted into something nourishing, whether that's a French stock, a Vietnamese pho base, or a pot of Jewish chicken soup simmered for a sick relative. The gelatin content is easy to spot without a lab test. A properly made broth will set up soft and jiggly in the refrigerator overnight, the same way a gelatin dessert would, and that's simply the collagen doing exactly what it's supposed to do once it cools. Save your vegetable scraps and leftover bones in a bag in the freezer as you cook your way through the week. Onion ends, carrot peels, whatever's left of a roasted chicken carcass, until you've built up enough to make a proper batch. It costs next to nothing to put together this way, and it wastes almost nothing in the process either, which is a kind of thrift I happen to respect. Now that's 15 foods, real ones, sitting quietly on grocery shelves, growing wild along fence lines, tucked into pantries most people walk past every single day without a second look. Some of these you'll take to right away, no trouble at all. Others might take some getting used to. The smell of natto, the sting of nettle before it's cooked, and that's perfectly fine. Nobody's grading you on this. Start with just one, add another next week, and another the week after that. This isn't a diet, and it isn't some strict program with rules to follow. It's just a slow, steady way of putting a little more good into the meals you're already making, one plate at a time, and one more time, plainly, because it genuinely matters. None of what you heard today replaces a conversation with your own doctor, especially if you're managing a condition, already taking medication, or expecting a baby. Food is a powerful tool. It was never meant to work alone, and it was never meant to replace the people trained to look after you. I've spent a good long stretch of my life watching what people eat, first from behind a nurse's badge in a busy hospital, and now from behind a garden fence with dirt under my nails. Those two views have taught me the same thing over and over, in different ways. The good Lord put a remarkable amount of provision into plain, humble things, roots and weeds and small fish and forgotten cuts of meat, and most of us were simply never taught to look twice at any of it. If this kind of thing is useful to you, go ahead and subscribe, and come back next time. There's always another patch of garden worth digging into, and another overlooked food worth putting back on the table where it belongs. So tell me, out at your own garden fence, which one of these 15 is already growing or already sitting in your own pantry without your ever knowing what you had? Until next time, take care of that garden, take care of that body the Lord gave you to look after, and may He bless you and keep you well.